Hello, everybody. My name is Larry Q. Drone Jr., and welcome to another episode of the Conversations in Rhythm podcast. I'm super excited today because I get to speak with uh, Dr. Tyshawn Sorey. I've been an admirer of this gentleman's work for a very, very, very long time. He's an incredible, uh, obviously, percussionist, drum set player, but he's so much more than that. He's a brilliant composer, conductor, and honestly, academician. So today we're really going to delve into a lot of really important things that you, as a drummer, as an improviser, and also as a musician, you need to be aware of, because all of those different hats that Mr. Sorey wears causes him to approach the instrument from a very wide perspective. So while we're waiting on him to join us, I want to read some of his accolades because, once again, I'm excited too, Nakia, because this ain't a regular dude. Y'all gotta understand, man. Tyshawn's really humble in his demeanor. He's very meek in his demeanor, but Tyshawn ain't playing, y'all. So listen, this brother has won the Pulitzer Prize, right? Like in composition. You need to Google that. What I want to do for you is I want to read to the musicians out here the list, or not a full list, but just some of the names that he's rubbing elbows with. These are his peers, right? These are composers that have won the Pulitzer Prize before him. Aaron Copland. Anybody who's taken any Western art music history class, you learned about Aaron Copland being like one of like the truly American classical composers. And yeah, he's in there with him. Charles Ives, he's also in there. Elliott Carter. I'm definitely excited to talk with him about Elliott Carter because for those of you who don't know, Elliott Carter coined a term in classical music called metric modulation, which is basically in the West African construct is just dealing with polyrhythms and understanding how to stack different rhythmic groups on top of each other and to smoothly transition from one into another. A lot of classical composers were listening to African music and they were getting, it was expanding their understanding of possibilities in rhythm. And Elliott Carter is one of the cats who really caught that wave. Gunther Schuller. Come on now. Wynton Marsalis. We definitely going to talk about the Marsalis family because I really feel like, or I know rather, that if it wasn't for the accomplishments of Wynton in the 1980s and how he was not only able to climb to the top of the jazz world from a commercial standpoint, but more importantly, how he was able to climb to the top of the classical world in merit. And the reason why I phrase it like that is because if you know anything about Wynton, he'll be the first to tell you that even though everybody was all in his face telling him, man, you this great jazz trumpet player, he knew that at the age of 18, 19, 20, whenever the world was giving him all this attention, he knew he was still learning. It took him longer to master jazz because at the end of the day, jazz is just harder. It's harder than classical music. Classical music, you're reading what somebody else, you're basically following instructions. Whereas in jazz, you have to spontaneously compose with the same type of intellectual rigor. And if it wasn't for cats like Wynton Marsalis, cats like Tyshawn wouldn't exist because Wynton did it in the 80s. Shout out to Wynton Marsalis. Shout out to Jason Marsalis. If you haven't watched the previous podcast I've done interviewing him, I have 2 exclusive interviews with Jason. You need to go back. It's going to blow your mind. Ornette Coleman. Come on, y'all. You need to go back and listen to my interview with Dr. Mundre Moffitt, who is actually a godchild of Ornette Coleman. His father, Mr. Charles Moffitt, was a collaborator and also co-creator in what later became to be known as harmolodics, the theory of harmolodics, which was basically Ornette Coleman's concept for his music. But his father, Charles Moffitt, and also his drummer, actually helped behind the scenes really give nomenclature and give shape and give form and give clarity and focus to what became harmonic theory. He called it freedom with discipline. You need to go back and listen to my interview with his son, Dr. Mondre Moffitt, for greater clarity on that. Let's keep going through these composers. Mr. Sorey has just joined us. I see he's just joined us. I'm super excited. But let me keep going about these cats who he's in the same company as. Steve Reich, Henry Threadgill, Kendrick Lamar, Anthony Davis, and Rihanna Giddens. I was so excited to see her name because, you know, she's from North Carolina. And she was part of a group called the Chocolate Drops. And their concept was brilliant. It was a bunch of young black kids, and they were dealing with what people would perceive to be, they look at bluegrass and they would look at like Appalachian style, like banjo music as primarily Caucasian music. But no, that's actually music that the slaves created. And the banjo is actually an instrument from Africa. And what inspired me about the Chocolate Drops whenever I was like 17, 18 was you had these young black kids that knew their history, and they were adamant about connecting with the older generation to share that. So, Tyshawn, if you would, sir, would you please shoot me a request to join this live video, and we'll be off with the interview as follows. I see Patrice, and I apologize if I get your last name wrong. It like Schlagzweg or Schlagzug. I apologize, but I see that you put a heart next to Tyshawn's name. Yeah, Tyshawn's a bad dude. He's a bad dude, y'all. Look, all my gospel drummers who will tune in today and who will be watching this in the future, you need to investigate. You need to get some Tyshawn Sorey in your sound. It's gonna change everything. That brother is dealing with, and y'all already know how I say. You know, I'm truly honored to be able to sit down. You know, with someone of his caliber. I don't take this lightly. I believe that we're on. Is that you,
That's me.
Tyshawn? What's happening, brother? How you doing, man? Very, very well. I'm doing very well. It's good to see you, brother. Good to see you.
Likewise, my pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So I was just telling the people, as we were waiting on you to get on, I was talking to them about how huge it is, this group of people who you were in company with by being a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Oh God.
Like, like, and
Yeah.
dude, let me say this. Let me say this. One of the things I've always appreciated about you from afar is your humility, man. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Thank you for
It's yeah. Because the thing about real humility, man, is because it's a heart thing. You can tell when somebody really has it. Obviously, we as artists and as professionals, we recognize that it's just proper decorum to just give the perception of humility in certain situations. But the thing I dig about you, man, that I've been able to detect uh, from afar, even in your interviews and just your overall demeanor, man, I really appreciate your spirit and your heart of humility, man, because you really have done a lot for us as the drum community where you could have your chest poked out. You know, you could be Mr. Unapproachable if you wanted to be, you
Yeah.
know,
Mm-hmm.
but but your humility, bro, I really appreciate that. And that's something that's not really honored in our generation. But man,
Um,
I just wanted
man,
to just thank you for that, man.
indeed, man, I appreciate that. You know, doing what we do, I mean, it's like you got to have this sense of humility there. I mean, it's like, or else how are you going to even function on the bandstand? You know what I mean? How are you
Come
even
on.
going to with other people if you can't even like, have any humility even for yourself? You know, in terms of what you accomplish and what you set out to do for yourself. You know what I mean? It's like, you have your dream and you have to do whatever work you have to do, to fulfill that. And one of the things that it takes to really do it and do it well is humility. You never want to you don't ever want to be comfortable because that way you're going to lose your edge otherwise. You know what I'm saying?
Come
So
on.
humility is going to be the thing that's going to keep you, really going. You know what I mean? In terms of doing it that way. So I just try to learn, from I still try to learn, from people who've mentored me and who continue to mentor me and who have set, a really prime example in terms of, exercising that humility and empathy for other people, on and off the bandstand,
I did.
and I try to get better at this, every day, as much as I can. So thank you for, for stating that because, that's something that we definitely need a lot more of, especially in the younger, well, in my generation too. But I mean, just globally, we really need more of that right now. Especially during the situation we're in the world right now. Where humility is not even not even thought of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just given everything that's been going on. I mean, just with the war and all of this other stuff, that's taking place. I mean, I'm not really interested in discussing politics particularly, but but seeing the world we're living in right now, I mean, to think about humility, empathy, love. I mean, we need more of all of these things, to bring us together because we're a lot better than this, and we need to let ourselves know that, and we need to let other people tell us that, that we're a lot better than this, where we are right now. So I just wanted to say that much, in terms of, what it means to have this kind of humility, be a part of be an extension of who we are. And, we need more of that in our life.
I concur. I concur 1000%, man. I was told by my dad one time, he was like, pride is supernatural blindness and humility is supernatural sight.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
And that I thought that was powerful. Um,
Love it. Love
I'm look
that.
I'm I'm looking at your resume, man. I was reading your bio on your website, and I know you're in the company of, I think Max Roach was like the first jazz drummer, percussionist, composer to get the MacArthur Grant, but
Hmm.
also Daphne's Prieto. I remember whenever he got it. And I know
Yeah,
it's been some other jazz musicians. I think Miguel
yeah,
Zenon. It's a couple of bad cats, but obviously this is called Conversations in Rhythm, right?
sure.
And it our primary demographic is percussionists first. Um,
Well, I'll include Cecil Taylor in that category as
Come
well, in terms
on,
of
because
everything.
piano's a percussion instrument. Come on.
Yep, exactly. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and him being a private, I mean, him, having actually played with Max and all of that stuff, and the
Yeah.
conversations ended up being like, I mean, remembering how memorable those experiences were. I mean, I didn't get to actually see them, but I heard recordings and saw footage, of those two playing together. So, but I'm thinking of Cecil when you were talking about the idea of conversations and rhythm. I mean, it's like, well, or Anthony Braxton and Max Roach.
Come on.
You want to talk about rhythm? I mean, it's like, Cecil's music is, full of rhythm. I mean, Anthony Braxton's music, no matter how people might feel about it or, whatever they might think about it, his music too is full of rhythm. I
Yes.
mean, very, very complicated,
Yeah.
nearly,
Come on.
I mean, virtuosic, kind of rhythm. And one has to really be skilled to, play that music accurately,
Mhm,
if you
mhm.
talk about in terms of rhythm. and what that music requires you to do. I mean, that's another element of his music that I think generally isn't really talked about as much. But but I mentioned all this because you mentioned Max, and I'm thinking of these two guys who have amassed a body of work that is so huge and
Yeah.
extensive. You know what I mean? Looking at them as composers as well. I mean, Max Roach too being a composer, Daphnis of course, and
Yeah.
and all these others you mentioned. I mean, it's great to be in that lineage, and it's great to be able to have this conversation where we can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, for those who don't know, the MacArthur Grant or the MacArthur Fellowship is colloquially referred to as the Genius Grant, meaning that you got to be pretty smart to get it, and your concept, whatever you're presenting to the world, has to have a lot of intellectual weight to it. It basically it has to prove to be worthy, and something that's like beneficial to really helping mankind. Um, so I mean, I want to. There's so many different directions that I want to go in because, like I said, your art is so inspiring. But I really want to start with intellect because the space that you have been able to um, go into, especially like in the contemporary. I know you don't like genres. I know you don't like genres and
Yeah,
titles.
for the sake of the conversation.
Exactly, for the sake of the conversation.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, man, I was saying before you got on that you remind me a lot of Wynton Marsalis in that Wynton, we don't celebrate him as black people enough because what he single-handedly did in the 1980s by climbing the mountain of Western art music and overcoming what you run into in that world, sometimes not with everybody. I'm not saying that everybody has certain prejudices and the racial component, but the but how he was able to prove, or excuse me, disprove the scientific racism that a lot of times we deal with as black men. It's like
Hmm.
people want to try to discredit and take away from our intellectual intentionality. It's like they
Right.
just want to make the achievements that we do just be merely athletic. We
Yeah,
we
exactly.
exactly. It's not just kinesthetic intelligence. Like we run the gamut. So if you could, being the brilliant person you are, could you just talk to me a little bit about like the environment that your parents created for you, and just intellect in general, like just being smart, man. Like, could you just however you want to deal with that?
I mean, the idea was that I mean, just basically making my own environment. I mean, in a way, I kind of raised myself. I mean,
Okay.
and I don't get too much into my personal upbringing when I was younger because that was a very dark time for me. But at the same time, what I will say is that as long as I was able to have the idea of being successful, be consistent, in my mind as I was going through things, then there was nothing anybody could do to stop me.
Come on.
Like I don't care if it was peer pressure or whatever it was. I mean, I grew up in a public school system like almost everybody else in my neighborhood. I
Yeah.
mean, predominantly black neighborhood, in North New Jersey, and I grew up in the housing projects over there, and everything, and
Mhm.
spent, a lot of time, walking around in these neighborhoods and stuff, and I just chose not to get involved with certain kinds of activity out there. I mean, to me, it wasn't rocket science to me. I mean, I just said, I mean, if I want to be successful in what I'm doing, all I got to do is just avoid the nonsense
Right.
out there, and just continue to. I mean, it wasn't that hard, I mean, but for some people it is difficult, and I get that too. But
Yeah.
at the same time, for myself, I knew what I wanted to do,
Uh,
and I knew that I did not want to be like some people who I saw who were struggling and who were going through very difficult times because of poor choices or whatever.
right.
So, I chose not to go in that direction, and I chose not to succumb to the peer pressure. And, I was always the odd guy out, you know what I mean? No matter where I was, if, any in fact, it's still kind of that way, where I'm sort of the odd out, particularly in social situations, because, one, I always was to myself. I was always, to myself, always was kind of a loner and everything, and I still am a little bit to an extent. And I was always the type of person to just always have things on my mind, in anything, intellectual, or, whether it's related to schoolwork, or if it's related to music, or if it's related to art or anything of that sort. I mean, I always would be thinking about information, and I would always, you know, try to put myself in a position where I have access to information. Like the radio was the thing that did it for me.
Okay.
Listening to WKCR FM, and where they would play all kinds of music on that radio station. Same with WBGO, which at that time for a jazz station, they too had a lot more of a variety in programming back in the early '80s, I think, than they do now.
Okay.
But and BGO, I mean, I think that station came about in 1982, 83, something like that. So it was a fairly new station. I mean, at the time that I came around listening to it. But the thing I will say also is that, while I always got very good grades, in school and everything, I was on honor roll many, many times and this sort of thing. And I always was able to complete all of my homework assignments and do all of that stuff on time, do all of my in-class assignments and everything. I always practiced too. Like I spent a lot of time practicing because I just wanted to carve out that time for myself, to work on things. And this was often during lunch periods. Like I wouldn't really go have lunch and go out and play and do all of this stuff, like what one typically does, in the public school where, you would have your lunch and you would be playing with the other kids and socializing and doing whatever. I would just, I would eat my lunch and I would go straight to the music room and just, and beg my music teacher to let me in. And he was like, "What are you doing here, during lunch or whatever? Like, you're supposed to be out with the other kids." But I guess he saw that I had a drive, and he saw that I actually had, like I had a purpose that I wanted to get to, and that was to be some kind of musician, right? Some kind of musician who would perform in different mediums. So he saw that in me. So then he allowed me, opportunities for me to get into the practice room like 7 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning. Like I'd be the first student at that school, and the security guards and people like that thought I was crazy, because what kid wants to, you know, say for like what 11, 12, 13-year-old or whatever, 14-year-old wants to, be at school that time of morning, So
Yeah.
but they saw again, it was one of those things where if the people you're around see that you actually have a drive and you have a purpose and you are trying to do things, they'll support you.
Yeah.
They'll do, even if it may not mean that they're going to be coddling you or something like that, but if they see that you have a purpose that you want to achieve, they'll support it in any way they can. And I'm thankful for the opportunity, for the many opportunities that the security guards in my junior high school and high school, would let me in, sometimes as early as 5 in the morning. I mean, I had a music teacher in my high school who would try to get there and do, some of his work. He would work a lot on MIDI, and he was a guitarist, and guitarist and theory teacher, and he would do a lot of stuff, where he would be creating these MIDI arrangements, of music and stuff. Like he would be there like at 5 in the morning doing this stuff before, everything would, before the chaos would ensue for homeroom, or whatever, like at like 8:30 or something like that or whatever.
Yeah.
So he'd be there 5 to 8:30 working or whatever. And one time I asked him, it's like, "What time do you get here?" Because I wanted to, find a way to get in there and practice also in the morning. And he told me he got in at 5 in the morning. And so my grandmother, bless her spirit, bless her heart, she would get up, before she would even have to go to work, to take me, to my high school at 5 o'clock in the morning,
Wow.
and I would literally go in the building and it would just be me and him, working on individual music things or whatever, MIDI arrangements of stuff that I've, either heard in concert band or things that I heard on the radio or whatever the case or it was, or if it was beats or whatever it was, I was always working on music and doing something. And if it wasn't that, then I would be reading, or I would be, I would just be studying a lot of different information, and just to gain some kind of knowledge, in other fields that I may not necessarily be familiar with.
Yeah.
I mean, literature being one of them. So I think, as long as I say all of that to say that if one really has a drive and they're really serious about that drive, no matter if it makes you look like you're crazy or if it makes you not really fit in with other students or fit in with other people or that kind of thing or whatever, it doesn't matter, because it's you, the one who's in control of how your life is going to end up, not other people. And I knew that somehow intuitively early on, that I just, that's the route that I took. So I guess it just worked out that way. I mean, I didn't really, like I said, it wasn't a big deal to me. I just said, I had to do what I had to do to achieve whatever I wanted to. And I was always told, by members of my family, that, you could do anything you want. It's and I'll tell you something else. I always thought to myself, it's easy to be lazy, right? It's very easy to be lazy. It's easy to not be successful, right? It's easy to not do that. And you know why? It's because the discipline is gone. You don't have the discipline, and you're not really worried about, any kind of, amount of time it takes for you to get to something, or to be after, to not have that discipline. It's like, it's a lot easier to go through life doing that, because you don't have this idea where you have to stay on top of things all the time or whatever. And I just knew that, I mean, that was one of the things that, my uncle, who also helped to raise me, that was one thing that he taught me, that it's easy to be lazy in life, but it's a lot harder to try to be successful, because, or to do what you need to do to achieve things in life, because you always have to be on your toes, and you always have to stick to your guns, no matter what anybody says or what anybody thinks, and so I guess that's how I chose to live my younger years, was by being that way.
That's powerful, man. I think that's a wonderful testimony to everybody, that's all of the younger people that are not only watching this live but also will see this in the future. Um, that's such a wonderful example of clarity and focus, and you confirming to them, like, yo, you not wild and you not crazy for being different. Like,
Right.
you're that way for a reason. Tap into that and really focus and really push, because it's necessary for who you're supposed to become.
Exactly. I mean, it's like, and it's not even about, the idea of being the most popular kid in the room, because oftentimes it's been said the loudest one in the room is often the
Right.
weakest, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
it's like, for me, like, I was never into the idea of being, a popular kid in the school or something like that.
Yeah.
But one thing was for sure, that that I was the person who was most likely to succeed in my schools.
Mm.
And the other thing for certain was that I was the person that was often, while not popular, was also the most talented. And it's because I had that ambition, and it's because I had that drive, and I did everything I had to do to live life in the way that I wanted to. What I mean? And like I said, um, I don't care if I was popular or not, and I still don't care if I'm pop. I don't care about
Right.
popularity. I mean, I was just,
Right.
it's nice to get attention, and it's nice for people to recognize you for the work you do and that kind of thing. But I'm talking about some kind of social. The kind of attention I'm talking about is social currency.
Right.
That's never been a concern to me.
That's good.
Because I know for myself, you know, if there are people there who are going to want to support what I'll do, they're going to make themselves be there, and
Exactly.
they're going to make themselves available for me to ask them for any advice, or to ask them for friendship or whatever the case may be. They'll do that work. I mean, I shouldn't have to force the issue, if
Right.
it's something that I'm not necessarily after. So,
I think that's fly, man. Um, So what brought you to jazz, right? Like you were telling me how in high school, you were into making beats. You talked to me about like the radio that you listened to and how it had like all the different genres of music. But what drew you, how did you come to jazz?
I would say by accident.
Okay.
It was, I was a little kid. I was literally all of 2, 3 years old, at the
Uh-huh.
time I got into my father's and my uncle's record collections and would kind of dig through their stuff and be curious about what they were checking out and what they were listening to. And I just fell in love with the music right away. I mean, it was, just something, I just knew that there was a lot more out there than, say, for example, than what was on popular music, because I was also raised around a lot of popular music as well.
Yes,
But
yes.
I wanted other things too,
Uh,
and so I just happened upon jazz on the radio. It was just something that I dug, something that I really liked, and I just kind of got into it that way. I didn't really have any kind of methodology for how I got into it or take any lessons to get into it or something like that. It was just there. I mean, it was in the house. It was on the radio, and so I would just listen to it all the time. But I would also listen to other kinds of music as well because, like I said, the world is big, and there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot more than what we're typically exposed to at home.
yeah.
So I had to kind of discover this music for myself and see what it is about. What about it do I like so much? What is different about it from, say, listening to popular music or from to listening to R&B or something like that. And I guess one of the things that drew me a lot to it was the sophistication behind the music,
Uh-huh.
and also the way that musicians are able to really spontaneously compose their own music on top of pre-existing, standards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that one category, and then, also, them having their own original compositions that sometimes I wouldn't know what I was listening to, because I didn't have the ears yet to really kind of,
Yeah.
understand what exactly they were doing. I mean, that developed later, just, in later repeated listenings and over my school years, learning about theory and learning about, vocabulary and learning about different facets of the music and that sort of thing. So it was always in the house, and it was something that I just continued to remain curious about and continue to get more and more in depth into. And, again, it was no big deal to me whenever I would approach a facet of so-called jazz that I was not familiar with or that sounded quote unquote weird or whatever. Like none of that language really existed
Uh-huh.
um, for me in terms of, oh, this is weird. Like this is a weird music. And, I mean, if it's music that I didn't dig, like if there's some sort of artist whose music I did not dig, I would, just put it to the side and I'll just say, okay, I'll get back to this later
Yeah.
because, I just want to understand better, what's going on there before I completely dismiss it or something like that. Like I don't like to really dismiss things like that because I
That's
don't.
good.
That's yet another opportunity to not learn,
Mhm.
right, about you know the music that came before you. Like listening to so-called free jazz, for instance, like that didn't freak me out. I mean, I know
Uh-huh.
sometimes it might freak out other people, upon first hearing it, but again, it comes to the idea of acceptance and accepting, the sounds that you hear, accepting the sounds that you hear for what they are, not for what you think they should be, you
Yeah.
know. And so that's how I was able to get into it. And I have a lot of records now. I have a lot of records, a lot of CDs and everything, and I know a lot of music, but a lot of that had to do with being able um, to try to learn as much as I can about, no matter what it is, who I'm listening to, and to also, say, look, think about what got you into this music,
Mhm.
and the artist who brought you to it, the people who you've been exposed to, the musicians you surrounded yourself by. playing in local musicians groups and stuff like that. You know, all of these things are what kind of, you know, it just helped me to grow, you know, in later years, you know, as the years kept going. And I'm thankful for that, you know, being able to play in, you know, little bands here and there, you know, in the city of Newark, and then branching out into New York City, because I spent a lot of time there as well, you know, and, just surrounding myself, you know, and being curious and being really steadfast, you know, in what I was after in the music that I loved, you know, the most, which was spontaneous creative music, you know, or
Yeah.
what we call jazz.
Yeah.
You know, just listening to that all the time, and at the same time, I'm understanding that that's just one branch off this tree, you know, that we're dealing with, which is the world of sound, right? The world of music,
Come on.
and you know, looking at it from that way. So it was not only this with jazz, you know, just being curious and it being on the radio, but other forms of music too have done the same thing for me. Contemporary classical music. I recall one story one time where my dad at one time said to me, "You don't understand that music. Like you don't know what this is." You know, I was like, "Well, I don't have to know what it is to appreciate it." I mean,
Right.
I didn't know what it was either, but it's like, but the sound was what drew me into it, and I wanted to understand more about what that is, you know, or the same for other kinds of music, you know, that I've listened to. You know, international music, you know, music from other cultures.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and I would just listen to any and everything, you know, and would absorb as much of it as I could and dig it for what it is, rather than, you know, just simply, you know, becoming some kind of purist or something. I mean, there was one period where that did happen, and I
Come
was
on.
about 6 years old, where I only listened to jazz and nothing else. You
Uh,
know, one period where I did that, I was like, damn, like I missed out, you know, during that 1 to 2 year period where all I listened to was jazz, because there was so much more I think I could have learned, you know, during that. But what did I know at 7, 8 years old? I mean, I just done
right.
what I liked, and that was it. You know, so it was a good experience though. But yeah, what brought me to it? Just curiosity, staying curious, and remaining open to learning and remaining open to dealing with approaches that I'm not as familiar with.
Mm-hmm. I dig. Um, we have a mutual acquaintance and a gentleman by the name of Rafik Bhatia,
Rafik,
guitarist.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. You
Amazing,
know, see,
amazing.
I'm saying it like that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You talk about another rhythmist, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm saying it like that, but Rafik will see this. He'll be like, "Yo, why is Q talking like that?" But yeah, yeah, yeah. Rafik is from my home state of North Carolina, and I remember when he was a student at Oberlin, um, he was coming back, and he would have these, you know, like you said, very complicated rhythmic charts. And I remember telling him one time, I was like, "Bruh, what is this?" He was like, "Dog, you gotta dig
Oh,
Tyshawn Sorey. You check him out." No, no, no. Real talk. Real talk. He'll tell you this to
oh
this
man,
day.
I appreciate
And
it.
bro, I heard you and I was like, holy crap, yo, like that's it. Like that's it. And then so he played me some VJ. I was listening to you play with VJ Iyer. Then I heard you play with Steve Coleman. And this was back whenever internet like was still kind of pixelated, like, but I remember seeing the video quality won't popping, but the sound quality was, and you were soloing over some Steve Coleman.
Oh man.
And that's actually where I got the question about the Fibonacci numbers, because
Mm.
when I was checking out Steve's music, from what I understand, like sometimes he would compose using the Fibonacci number system. And so I was curious whether that was how you were able to get inside of his music.
Well,
So let me
well,
park right there. Right? Yeah,
sure, yeah.
go ahead.
Well, also the I Ching. He's used I Ching symbols or whatever as a means of composing a rhythmic vocabulary for myself to, or Marcus Gilmore, sometimes my
Yeah,
budding partner, my close
yeah,
collaborator. He's amazing. I mean, he's just
yeah.
great working with him too. We've done, Marcus and I. We actually did a lot of tours together with Steve. You know, me and him,
That's
two
it.
drum sets. You know, dealing with
Wow.
this, and we each would have two different sets of I Ching symbols and everything, and I had to understand his rhythms in order for me to, understand my own. You know what I mean? It's like it's one of those things. We have to study each other's, rhythmic vocabularies that we work with, so that at any time we want to elaborate or anytime we want to switch off, we can just do it. So it's one of those things. So I mentioned Marcus because that was during the time. Big shout out to Marcus. We were doing this stuff together when Steve was using these, I Ching symbols, and and we would also play from his, earlier recordings and stuff like that. I mean, Marvin Smitty Smith, who's highly influential for me. I mean, just him being one of the cats to really establish that language. That whole way of playing rhythmically in Steve's concepts. I mean, it's like he was the cat who, to me, who like him and Doug Hammond, and going historically, and paying attention to what was going on in Steve's music, that informed me with how I should approach Steve's new music, right? Where he's doing I Ching symbols and stuff like that. I mean, I'm, because I've been listening to Steve Coleman since I was about 14 years old. I had no idea what I was listening to, at the time when I discovered his music, in a dorm somewhere, like at a summer camp. But when I first heard that music, I said, I want to play that. Like, that's the stuff, for me that I want to eventually get to. So, so my history with Steve Coleman's music goes actually, a very long way. And like I said, listening to all of those records, everything from the stuff that Smitty did to things that Gene Lake did, another amazing drummer, and I think he should actually be talked about more because
I agree.
He's just done some incredible prolific work with Steve during the 90s, and then Sean Smith, of course, who was another beast, on the instrument. I mean, it's like I listened to all these cats play that music, and then I said, okay, how do I deal with this music? If Steve has had such brilliant drummers on his roster, what the hell am I doing here? Like, why did he call me to do this? And again, it's one of those things where if a musician sees that, you have a potential and that you're there to learn and that you're there to really advance yourself, within whatever musical atmosphere you're in, then, they're going to hire you. And so that's what happened in my case. He called me to play with him, and this new music that he was working on, dealt with these sort of weaving rhythmic textures or weaving harmonic textures, where, sometimes harmony, for instance, or whatever, it may go one particular way, but it may go another kind of way for another soloist or for another, or for another player or whoever it is or whatever. So you got these different harmonic vocabularies that are kind of weaving in and out of each other, and you have the same thing that's going on rhythmically. And so the recording Weaving Symbolics, that was the music that we were kind of dealing with at the time that I joined Five Elements. And it then went to the recordings like Mancy of Sound and what was the Harvesting Symbols and Affinities. Those records were all dealing with these I Ching principles in his music. So he had but again, this goes back to the idea of how much vocabulary can be amassed, by a single artist, and how you're able to take that vocabulary and kind of make it personal. Because I didn't want to sound like those cats, As much as I love Smitty and I love all of these other great drummers, like I didn't want to be in there trying to copy them, because I mean, what does that look like? You know what I mean? Going in trying to sound like them. Like I wanted to use my creative sensibility, and I wanted to, use everything I came up doing and everything that kind of brought me to where I am, and just bring that to the music. And Steve really allowed me to do that, in a real way. He really allowed me the chance to do that. Like, because, I mean, I would take these forms and I would kind of get wild with these forms. You know what I mean? Like, I'll say, well, if you're looking at this set of I Ching symbols, like I'm almost approaching it like form in a way, where I can take I Ching symbols and I can, in some way, figure out a way to scramble them, but also in a way that it would still amount to the same time span, or it would still amount to
Ah,
the same different levels of time spans. So I would look at it from the level of first, the initial form that Steve sets up, two, the different ways that I can come up with reinterpreting that original form, and
yes.
three, finding ways of essentially getting away from that form and not being locked into it. And I can come back to it, or I can, I can come back to it or leave it at any given time and not be lost, because I understand the relationship of the
Yeah.
other forms that the other musicians are playing.
Yeah.
Because in order to really play that music well, um, you you not only have to know your so-called drum chant or whatever. You not only have to know that,
Mm.
you have to know the bass line, you have to know the melodic line, you have to know the harmonic rhythm. You got to know all of these things in order to play
Yeah.
this successfully and properly. It's not just about simply getting up there and having a drum pattern and then you just kind of go off and do your thing. Like, that's not what this music was. And I love situations like that, because having spent time doing this stuff in kind of my own music, which in some ways is actually more complex,
Uh-huh.
where I can play creatively in a way that doesn't make me feel forced to play in a forceful way, where I'm just basically locking everybody in, and I'm not allowing people to be expressive within that vocabulary. Like, I think of myself as a very expressive musician,
Yes.
and as a person who's just very expressive, no matter what the form is, or no matter what the chart says, and that kind of thing. It's like, you learn the chart, you listen over and over and over, you analyze, and then you forget, right? And so that was kind of the way that I went on, and that's how I was able to successfully perform that music, whether or not there was another drummer there. And a guy like Marcus, I mean, it was easy to do that with him, because
Yeah.
he too, you know, he's
Yeah.
an extremely expressive player and a beautiful musician, and somebody who understood that you not only have to know, your part, but you have to know all of the other musicians' part. Like, we think very much alike, in
Mm.
that. That's why that whole Mancy of Sound and Harvesting Symbolis's records. That's why they were so good,
Hmm.
I think, and that's why I thought that's why I thought that we did a fantastic job, because neither of us tried to sound like each other. We more or less complimented each other, and the way that that happened was also, first of all, through Steve's forms, but also through our sensibilities, as in terms of thinking in a composerly
Yeah.
way. I mean, I should add too, Marcus too is a tremendous composer,
Yes.
whose work I also hold in high regard. So, you know, if you got musicians who think in this composerly way and who can come up with something uh, that's that's really on a high level, but also in a way that serves the music, then you can do no wrong. And so that was my approach to that situation. No matter how complex the music was, I mean, I tried to be as expressive as possible while still serving the music, and also challenging myself all at the same time, and possibly challenging my other bandmates as well, but that's what the music is about, is about that challenge, and how to create opportunities as a result of these challenges to make something beautiful and musical happen. You know.
That's good, man. I hope everybody goes back, rewinds to the beginning of what you just said, because you just gave the cheat code on how to be successful in any music. You just gave a cheat code on how to be successful in any musical ensemble, and then you gave like the three layers of expression. You talked about how first you just got to learn the music,
Right.
then you have to play around with with rearranging different parts, and then the highest level being able to completely digress away from that. But you gave the cheat code within that, which is you got to know everybody's part. If you know everybody's part in the ensemble, you're not gonna get lost,
Right.
because regardless of how you're digressing, you have that reference to home, or the you have that as a foundation.
Yes.
That's $1 million worth of game right there, man. Um, So you're talking about
That can go
about
for music. That can go for any genre of music, any music you want,
yes.
no matter what it is. That should be the approach, I think. You know, if you want to be an expressive player, and if you really want to be creative and not feel so confined to whatever it is you're dealing with, then that, I think, is the way to do it. You know, maybe another way to do it might work for other people,
Mhm.
but it worked for me. So
Yeah.
that's what it.
I dig. Hey, if it works for Tyshawn, we know it's gonna work for the rest of us. Um, so I was I was checking some things out with you conducting, and this is serendipitous, man, because you spoke about free jazz earlier. My mentor in undergrad is Mondre Moffitt,
Oh
who's
yeah,
a, yeah,
yeah,
you know Dre, yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so his baby brother
That,
Charnett played with Wynton, and then just Charnett on his own. But then his father was one of the pioneers of loft jazz back in the '60s with Ornette.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
great drummer. Nobody talks about him, but another unsung great in the game. Yep.
come on, man, come
Yeah.
on. So so I was rapping with Dre about this very subject. We were talking about how his father really hasn't received his due credit. And in the process of us talking, he he branched off into conduction,
Mm.
and he started talking to me about Butch Morris.
Yeah.
And I was checking you out, and Butch Morris, well, Lawrence Butch Morris, Butch is his nickname, but
Yeah.
he came up, and I was like, "Yo, Tyshawn's in the conduction. I gotta hear how you got into that." And if you could, if you want, however you want to do it, you want to kind of explain to the people what it is, or you just want to just talk about it first, and then they can just glean. However you want to talk about it, man.
Well, Butch was one of the first. He was one of the first musicians I met. You know, when I was like kind of fully in New York. You know, he was
Mm,
one of the first people I met out there when I was kind of more or less in New York very regularly. And this is in the I want to say the late '90s, early 2000s, something like
okay.
that. Um,
Yeah.
when I found myself in New York more regularly, playing with a lot of people and stuff like that. So, but Butch, when I learned about what he does, when well, I should tell you the person who introduced me and another unsung hero whose name I think should be said more, more everywhere is Michelle Rosewoman, who's a great pianist and composer, and teacher, and she has taught me so much growing up. And I mention her name because she was the person responsible for introducing me to some of these concepts, for introducing me to this idea of conducted improvisation, and
Yes.
finally, there was a birthday party that was happening in the Lower East Side that she was having, and Butch Morris was one of the guests of this party. So she introduced me to Butch, and right away, uh, Butch was quite a character. I mean, it's like he had a very stoic sense about him.
Yeah.
When I first met him, he was this young 19-year-old kid, who's like, who just became aware of conduction and who became aware of, his vocabulary. He was very genial. He was beautiful, really, really genial. But at the same time, you could just tell, like, this guy in the room, I was just curious about him. I was very, with his beard and with his, mustache and this very distinct, hairdo and a distinct way that he dressed. I said, man, this man has to be like, I mean, he's really, I was just curious about him. And so I met
Mhm.
him, and he was very nice to me. And a couple years or so go by, maybe a couple years go by after I met him at that first meeting, and he called me just cold, out of the blue. And
Wow.
I don't know how he got my phone number. I had a
Mhm.
landline at the time when those were around. So he called me, and left a message on my answering machine. And I came back home, and this is the same cat who I met 2 years ago, asking if I could play a string of performances over 2 months during the summer of that year. And I don't think he even heard. I don't know if he even heard me yet. I don't. I mean, I don't really. But but I get this phone call, and at that time, I already happened to be playing with Vijay, Vijay Iyer.
Yeah.
You know, at that time, so I was already kind of around. You know, doing some things. Um, Back and forth with Vijay and and his peers and other musicians, in the New York scene. So he may have gotten my number from somebody out there, but he called me for that string of gigs, and Vijay was actually on a few of those first gigs that I did with him.
What?
Believe it or not. Yeah, oh yeah. Vijay, man, I can go down the list. I mean, it was Vijay, Graham Haynes, who I met for the first time.
Uh-huh.
This is like 2000. This is like right after 9/11.
Wow.
This is
Wow.
like early 2000s. Like summer 2002 was when that all was going down, and Vijay, Graham Haynes, who else was there? Brandon Ross was there. Stomo Takeshi, all of these, and these guys, these are mostly people who have worked in the downtown scene and with Threat Gill and
Mhm.
people who are kind of establishing their own musical languages. So I was surrounded by all of these cats, who were dealing with that kind of music and who were there for Butch's conductions. And so I guess in the first, the first thing I noticed was how, first of all, just how amazing the results were become. I mean, some nights were some nights were better than others, but the beautiful thing was that Butch was always challenging his musicians on stage, with his
Yeah.
conduct. And let me just say for those out there who don't know, conducted improvisation is a lexicon of visual and gestural cues that are given to players or groups of players in the given moment during creativity. And we typically don't have music when we do this, but I do recall those first gigs. Butch did indeed write some original music, and so we would have this music on the stands. One time we had a couple of original compositions of his, and another time he took me on my first trip to Italy as well.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and so in Italy we played music of Mozart as part of his conduction, and he took. So I was seeing what he was doing with some of this music, and that was the thing that struck me the most in terms of how I would like to approach it going forward. Was that he would have the sheet music and he would have special gestures or special cues that he would give for us to integrate, parts of that original music or Mozart's music or whatever it was. And so so that was one thing about it that struck me was the way he was able to creatively construct form spontaneously like that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that struck me about it too was that no matter the musicians who are there, be they traditional musicians from other countries, or be they musicians who don't read music at all, or be they musicians who, happen to be working with sound. See, Butch's thing was about sound, and it was about really how to create another kind of fabric using all of these different sounds, on the stage,
Mm.
anywhere from 5 to 25 or 30 musicians up there, with who he does this. And the results are always mesmerizing for me because the thing that struck me about that was that as a musician, if you're up there with, all of these different musicians on stage and you're listening to them, then everything you're going to do at that moment is going to count for something.
Yeah.
It's not about me going up there and playing the drums when I'm told to.
Right.
Like I'm listening to every part of it, to everything that's going on. And so anyway, to go back to the first gig, um, I guess I played fairly well for the situation. Um, I got my butt kicked, in that situation, for the first time, because Butch, he would give you a look of death, if you made a mistake,
Uh,
if you didn't follow some kind of cue or something like that he would give, and if you missed the cue, like you were either fired or you would be reprimanded for missing
uh,
missing something in that music. But it was a beautiful learning experience for me, and and I think I made maybe one or two mistakes or something like that while playing. But I guess I was the right cat for him at the time, and so he said, "Well, whenever you want this gig, you got it." And
Wow.
so it kind of led to me working with him more often, over the preceding years, on and off, doing other things, because then my schedule started getting busy with
Yeah.
other. But whenever I would make Butch's things, I mean, it would always be fantastic, and I felt like I was a natural fit, in that situation, because it wasn't about the idea of so-called free jazz or something like that. See, what Butch did not want, and what I recognized right away was Butch did not want free improvisation or free jazz
Okay.
like that. That's not what this music was about. This was
Mhm.
an ensemble music that was
Yes.
about the construction of content through form, right? And doing things that way. And so that's
Yeah.
how I understood it, at the time, when I worked with him. And I guess by me not approaching it in this so-called free jazz kind of way, where I'll just play anything I want and not really listen, or whatever the situation was, I guess he took that as me really taking his concept seriously. I mean, as a young guy, I mean, I'm the youngest person in the band, when I was doing the stuff with them. And I remain grateful for all of the experiences that I've had, with all the musicians up there, some of whom I've got to collaborate with in later years. I mean, all of the people whose names I mentioned are people whose bands I've performed in. For a time, I performed a lot with Brandon Ross's For Living Lovers projects and a number of other projects that he had assembled and put together. Same with Graham Haynes. A few times I performed with his Electric Church project back in those times. I was already establishing a relationship with Vijay at the time that I joined Butch. Also, Billy Bang, who
Mhm.
was another fantastic musician, rest his soul. I got to work with him, and he was one of the first to, hire me regularly in New York. Ok Young Lee, I mean, she was there in some of these first installments that I've gotten to work with Butch. So I can name, countless musicians who I've gotten to form collaborative and friendly relationships with over the years.
Mhm.
And it just told me that, this is a community of people who are, after something different, in this
Mhm.
situation working with Butch. This is we're not about trying to just simply play what we feel and move on. Like we're after something higher, And
Yeah.
those situations with Butch would always make me feel that way, where we're after something higher than us simply just going on stage and just playing a concert. Like it was more of a ritual, and it was more of a chance for us to really bond together to create these sort of unbroken bonds through music making under Butch's leadership, which I thought
Mhm.
was beautiful. And so I treasure those experiences in working with him. Now, getting back to how I chose to deal with that concept for myself, I took it so seriously that at William Patterson University, which is where I got my bachelor's degree,
Mhm.
I had written a paper, an extensive paper, and I gave a presentation on Butch Morris as one of my final projects.
Wow.
And even some of the students there were not really aware of who he was. They thought some of them thought I was making this stuff up, about
Mhm.
conduction, because, they didn't know that such a music existed. And yet I
Mhm.
had been playing music with Butch, during that time for over a 2.5 year period while I was at the university. I'm still in college and I'm playing these gigs. So, but then, of course, I gave a presentation on Butch's vocabulary. I had memorized his cues and all of that stuff. I mean, he taught me some of this stuff. Normally he would keep his stuff to
Right.
himself. He would
Right.
never, show the musicians anything, right? But I guess he saw me as this kid or whatever, and thought, let me just, I mean, he was kind of a mentor in that way, just
Wow.
you know, maybe sometime you can take this and go further with it, or who knows. But anyway, so I did this presentation in class with some students in the jazz program at William Patterson, and right away when I was actually doing this presentation, that was when I did my first ever conduction, was with these students. um,
Okay.
and I said, man, I could really do something with this. I think I just felt like I had understood the language to a point, but I also understood how sensitive one has to be in that musical situation, and how really people should take advantage of the opportunity to be in this community environment with all the musicians engaging with each other in that way. Like, I just thought that that was very important to me. So that was where I did my first ever conduction, was there. And I've had no opportunity, I guess, later down the line until maybe 2011 or so, when I went to Valakilde, Denmark, which is outside of the outskirts of Copenhagen. I was there as a visiting artist for their summer workshop there. And when I went there, I spontaneously chose to, because by that point, I had already become aware of the history of conducted improvisation, and I've become aware of the social and musical dynamics, things like that that it involved. And so what I did was, at this summer session, I spontaneously gave a two-part thing. One was a seminar on conducted improvisation. It was like a 2-hour seminar, 2.5-hour seminar, where I talked about its historical context. I talked about the many different examples of people who have done conduction over years, you know what I mean, and how people like Lucas Foss, Frank Zappa, Leonard Bernstein,
Come
Walter
on.
Thompson, Anthony Braxton, all of these other people have done their versions of what conducted improvisation is.
Yeah.
So I gave a lecture kind of talking about that, and then we took a break because this was going to involve some playing, at the end of the thing. And so we took a break, and then I led my second conduction there in Denmark at that summer session. There must have been about maybe 25, 30 musicians present, and we were all in it. We really went all in on this. And of course, me having learned a lot as a composer over that period of years, that too informed my direction that I wanted to take things in terms of developing my own version of conducted improvisation. So at first, my system, which is called autoschediasms, is
Okay.
it started as a hybrid language using techniques that were developed by Anthony Braxton with his language music systems, which are his 12 sound classifications or whatever of different ways of creating sound. So that was one element. The other element was Butch Morris's conduction language, and
Okay.
so I started out with these two and used them both simultaneously,
Uh,
and so it started out with me doing that, and then it kind of branched out from there into me creating different kinds of uh, components for which conducted improvisation can happen. So, you know, for example, in Butch Morris's conduction signals, I would create new cases for some of those signals, meaning like I'm adding to the already existing vocabulary of Butch's information. So it got to the point where that became its own component, and so that component is called gesture, right? And so there's a second component which is called autonomy. Now, Anthony Braxton's language music vocabulary is a vocabulary of autonomy, where the musicians have to create these things out of their own accord by me giving a numerical cue anywhere from 1 to 12, right? So
okay.
so the musicians have to then create their own content based on the idea, let's say, for example, of long sounds, right? They have to play long sounds, but the content that they create can be done on their own way as long as they're dealing with that principle, you
Okay.
know. So that's what I mean. So the performers can exercise their autonomy in that way. And so with Anthony Braxton's language music signals, I did the same thing where I sort of changed the nature of those language music cues, and I've made new cases out of them, created new possibilities, to create some other kinds of content out of these things, um, and so that would be the second component, which is called autonomy. And the third component, which I guess solely came up with on my own, is called category. And that's the
Okay.
difficult aspect of autoschediasms because, number one, um, it involves two whiteboards, two different kinds of whiteboards where I would write information. And it could either be related to any music composition that is put in front of them, or it can be simply notated material on that whiteboard that I would show the musicians to use. But then they would have to also not only read what's on the whiteboard, but they also have to develop it sometimes using the other two components. Like combine a gesture cue along with a category cue
Ah.
sometimes. Or say, if I want something repeated an infinite number of times, then I would have to give a gesture for that, but also indicate that with a category cue, which is like, let's say if I wrote a chord or something like that, for the
Mhm.
musician to draw from, any cue or any kind of sound that they make, has to be based on whatever this thing says, on the whiteboard. So in a way, it's actually more control of the content, but actually it provides more opportunities for the musicians to be expressive using other means of technique or other means of memory or other ways of going about doing things. I mean, I think by adding that, it just stretches the whole idea of what gesture and what autonomy can do, and it really kind of just it just adds more. It just gives more possibilities for the musicians to create things based on things that either I think about or things that I've already heard that I've notated and on the spot and wrote down and that sort of thing. I can also change keys with the category cue. I can indicate what tonality I would want us to play in using a category cue. I would also indicate what kind of meter I'm going to want things to happen in using a category cue. So all of these different things, they add to the overall conductor's vocabulary. And I guess that's how autoschediasms came about. And I've been doing autoschediasms, I guess, um, officially now since 2014 or so, where I established it in Banff, Canada, as part of the Banff International Workshop in Jazz and Creative Music. Like that was where I kind of started the autoschediasms concept,
Uh,
where I would first with the musicians for 3 weeks. It would be somewhere between 50 and 60 musicians.
mm.
We would all be working together every night, working on this music and developing this stuff together. And shout out to all of the musicians who have walked with me during these occasions um, for that 6-7 year period where I've developed this autoschediasms language with all of the students there. That was really exciting for me. Yeah.
No, that's fly, man. So because what I dig is you did your due diligence to investigate what came before
Yeah.
you, um, mastered it, and now you're adding on to the lexicon. Like you're creating like new knowledge. Like
Yeah.
that's dope, man. Um, have you had opportunities while you were saying this? What was coming to mind was like just the generic skill set that it takes to do this successfully. You're really like a leader of leaders. It's like you're treating everyone in the ensemble like they're a leader,
Right.
and you're more or less just like directing traffic. Like, have you done like any seminars like for corporations, like with team building, like because man, like the stuff that you're teaching, like those principles could be applied like in the workplace. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm indebted to Butch and to Anthony also for
Come on.
teaching me all of this and for being the leaders they are, and being the leaders that they were to me. But no, I've not done this outside of musical situations. I mean, of course, it's my family. I have a family. I mean, that's I guess you could consider
Come
I
on.
guess you could consider the leadership role there, right?
Yeah,
But but other than
that's
that,
the most important one. Yeah.
yeah. But other than that, no. I mean, not in terms of corporations or other companies or things like
Wow.
that. I just try to take these concepts that I've learned from both Butch and Anthony, from a music making point of view, and
Mhm.
just really apply them to whatever musical situation it is. Whether it's with a conductor or not. I try to
Mhm.
do it that way.
I dig. Well, man, yo, Google, y'all need to hit him up. Y'all need to cut him a check and bring him in
Wow.
and take y'all to the next level. Um, while we're on this side of the conversation, you said something really cool in one of your Memphis drum shop videos
Okay.
about the harmonic series. Like playing first, you did one segment where you were talking about just playing the drums from just a sonic perspective, from just the thing you set up that yes, you approach the drums from a rhythmic perspective, but then you went on to talk about just approaching it from the standpoint of sound. And then there was like another video where I think you just demonstrated that more because especially when you talked about like the harmonic series and you talked about like being able to um, uh, manipulate like the pitch of a drum
Right.
and mute things. Talk to me about and well before I say that, when I heard you talk about the harmonic series, it reminded me of a conversation I had with Mondre Moffitt where he told me that Ornette Coleman, his concept for playing trumpet and violin,
Yes.
he was playing the instrument based on how it was built, meaning the harmonic series.
Oh,
Like that was
okay.
his concept.
Yeah.
So whenever I heard that, I was like, "Yo, is that what Tyshawn's talking about? Like dealing with the instrument from the harmonic series, and being able to manipulate, yeah, like what did you mean by that? And
I think what you mean is how I take the drum set beyond. Well, first of all, I didn't do any of this. I mean, I'm thinking of all of my predecessors, like, I mean, people like Art Blakey,
come on,
um,
come on.
Andrew Surreal, Han Bennett. Um, I mean, I can name so many different examples of drummers who have taken this instrument beyond just a rhythmic timekeeping instrument. I mean, Milford Graves. I mean the list will go on and on. I mean, so I am indebted to them for giving me the opportunity to explore the instrument in the way that I do.
Hmm.
But I think what you're referring to is taking the components of the drum set that might be overlooked, I would say.
Okay.
For example, the edge of a cymbal. Like being able to extract harmonics using the edge of the cymbal. Now, I got that from um, dealing with contemporary classical music and playing some of that music too.
Uh,
A lot of that stuff during my years at William Patterson University.
mhm.
Sometimes you would bow a cymbal or something like that using, whether it's hair, using hair basically, like a violin bow or cello bow or something like that, and putting that on the edge of the cymbal and being able to extract these really beautiful, colorful harmonics. And I've seen people do that on tam tams, or which are gongs.
Mhm.
I've seen people do tam tams or crotales. I mean, I've seen them do this on all kinds of metal stuff. It's like, well, maybe I mean, I'm a poor guy. I don't have a violin bow. I don't have a cello bow. Let me just try it on a stick and see what happens.
Uh, I did.
Oh, and I was able to do that, using a
Wow.
drumstick, being able
Wow.
to extract harmonics from the edge of cymbals, sometimes using drumsticks. And I guess the more I did it, the more I practiced doing that, the more I'm able to just do it, very easily. Um, and so, but a lot of these techniques I definitely got from the world. I mean, or let's talk about pitch bending and stuff like that. Listening to people like Art Blakey, for example, on all those classic records, and listening to how he bends the pitch,
Yeah.
using his arm, or that kind of thing. And Milford Graves, of
Yeah.
course, where he talks about pressure techniques that really have come out of um, West African drumming and that kind of
Uh-huh.
stuff. Pressure techniques and how that's kind of similar. How he's able to achieve similar effects of a talking drum, you know, using different kinds of pressure techniques with his hands or with his arms or or anything of that sort. So, I mean, I guess just thinking of all of these different historical lineages and considering those as part of my expressive vocabulary. Whenever I have the opportunity to use them, I don't always have the opportunity to use them, but I do know them very well because I do it. I do it a lot. And, whenever I come to an opportunity where I get to explore these kinds of things, you know, I always look to those guys for inspiration and for bringing me to the level that I'm able to really do that and do that very well. But and I mentioned Andrew Surreal too because he too is a pioneer in that regard, where he used, you know, like I can hear harmony literally when he's playing. Like I can literally hear that this guy is playing, you know, he's playing harmony. He's like just uh, the way, for example, just thinking of the music that he did with Cecil Taylor and, you know, and those guys and Jimmy Lyons and, you know, that group of musicians or whatever, like you could sense that there's some sort of harmoniousness that's going on there, you know, with the way that he's choosing to accompany these different musicians in so many different ways while also exploring, you know, something like a snare drum strainer on the drum, for instance. There's this recording. Well, there's unit structures. I think that's the recording which Andrew does this, but he actually takes the snare drum strainer mechanism and uses that, you know, as a way to create, you know, another sound and to create something
Yeah.
that worked harmoniously with the things that Cecil Taylor was doing, you know, on that record. There's a track on there where he does that. So, you know, whereas, you know, it's like, well, it's one thing you just put the snare drum strainer on and you got the snare drum sound and there it is. But with Andrew, he was like turning it on and turning it off, you know, just doing it constantly like that. And I was like, wow, that is very interesting how this is working so well sonically with what, you know, with what Cecil's doing on the piano. So it makes me think of these guys, you know, when I do this kind of stuff and when I kind of get into this language, you know, this way of playing drums that goes, you know, beyond just simple, you know, hitting the instrument or whatever. It's really about exploring the possibilities you get not only from the point of view of playing extended techniques, but also from the view of the actual components of the drums themselves. Like, for example, taking a floor tom leg, a knurled floor tom leg, for instance, or whatever, loosening that, you know, and just kind of playing with that friction, you know, like to kind of get some kind of texture doing that, you know, for instance. Or say, for example, taking the tip of the drumstick and driving it alongside the inner part of the hoop of the drum, like the snare drum hoop or tom tom hoop, floor tom hoop, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, getting a texture from that. Or taking, for example, a hot rod or something like that and taking only one part of the bundle and kind of dragging that along the coating of the drum head to create another kind of texture. You're almost creating like a seagull type texture or whatever when you read like that. So but yeah, I attribute all these sounds to a lot of the masters, you know, who came before me, and also with my experiences, you know, in playing contemporary classical music, and also just through my own discovery, you know, through just remaining curious about, you know, whatever is possible. Even though, like I said, I don't get to do that as much now as I did, say, in my early 20s or something like that. But you know, but it's still there, and I can pull it out if I ever need to.
Yeah. That's so inspiring, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on with me, man. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I
Absolutely.
want to I want to get ready to wrap things
Yeah.
up. And I just have one last question,
All right.
right?
Go.
So let's say that you let's say that Elon Musk hits you up and he's like, hey, you know, I really dig your artistry. I'm putting together this band of incredible musicians, but I'm gonna send y'all to Mars. Y'all gonna be the first group of people to go to Mars. Um, so he says to you, he's like, listen, you cannot bring your whole record collection for obvious reasons, right?
Okay.
You can only bring 5 CDs or 5 albums, however you want to do it. You can only take 5 artists of your choosing. Who is your top 5 that you would take with you to Mars, man?
Let me ask you a question.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay.
Um, do I have to take anything? Do I have to take those 5 recordings? Because the thing is if I'm going to be with other musicians, it's not to discredit any music that
No,
came. before. I'm not saying
Of
this,
course.
but it's like I wonder what would be going on there. Like I'd be curious. You know, I'm excited to see what's going to be going on up there. You know what I mean? It's like
Valid
I already
point.
know what's going on down here.
Yeah.
Like I've already, I've already been aware of the music that is taking place here. I want to know what's going on. In that other.
That Mars music.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to see what's happening there. Like I want to. What can I acquire from there? Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked that question.
Hmm.
Like like I could bring something up there if I want to. Of course, one would call it their desert island collection or something like that. But
Right.
what if I choose not to, and what if I choose to remain curious about whatever else is going on?
Uh,
In that situation, like I'm kind of one of those guys who want to know more about what's going on than what I already know about. And now if we mean this as a way of taking this collection of 5 recordings or whatever as a way of reminding myself where I came from, or as a way of getting into nostalgia and
okay.
remembering things that brought me to this point. I mean, that's one thing, but like I said, I would choose to remain curious about whatever music could be going on up there in Mars or whatever other planet we would end up being in or whatever. I would be excited by that possibility and see what was
Yeah.
happening there. So, but that would be my answer.
I dig. I dig. Well,
Yeah.
no, that's apropos, man. Ladies and gentlemen, y'all have heard it from the man himself, Dr. Tyshawn Sorey.
Thank you very much
Man,
for
this,
having me. This is really, really fun to do.
yeah, man. Well, hopefully this won't be the last one. We can get you back up here for a part two.
Yep.
Um, killing. Well, thank you so much, sir. Have a great rest of your day. Everybody watching, make sure if you're not already following his Instagram, go ahead and hit that follow button. Also, you can follow me here at Larry Drum Music, and we'll see y'all next time. Y'all stay swinging.
Y'all take care. Be well.
All right now.